Grant had been standing in the same corridor for 11 hours. He was wearing a uniform he pulled off a dead Veth soldier 3 days ago. The soldier had been roughly his height. That was the only thing Grant checked before taking it. He did not think about the rest. The war room was enormous. Not big like an arena, big like a space that was built to remind you that the people inside it had never once felt small. Holographic maps floated in layers above the main floor. Blue and gold light moved across them in slow pulses, marking fleet positions, supply lines, engagement zones across 4 colonial systems. The Veth officers moved through it the way things move when they have never been surprised by anything. Slow. Even. Like a clock that had always been right. Grant watched them. He counted rotation patterns. He tracked which officers reported to which stations and at what intervals. He memorized the shift change timing, 17 minutes between the 3rd and 4th rotation, 12 between the 1st and 2nd. He had been doing this for 11 hours. The numbers sat in his head in clean, orderly rows. He used to build logistics systems for a living. 20 years behind a desk at DARPA, finding weak points in supply chains, patching gaps in cargo routing. He was very good at finding the weak points. Better at finding them than fixing them, it turned out. The uniform itched at his collar. He did not reach up to fix it. On the far wall, one of the engagement maps cycled through to a historical record. A transit corridor. Tagged and labeled in Veth script. His translator implant caught it a half second after his eyes did. Asterisk Vethra zone. Cleared. Asterisk. He knew that corridor. His son Owen had been on a transport moving through that corridor on a Tuesday, 19 years old, on his way to a marine biology internship on one of the outer colony stations. Owen had liked terrible puns. He could identify 47 species of Pacific tidepool invertebrate by sight. He had a laugh that went on 2 beats longer than anyone expected. The Veth had flagged his transport, boarded it, released Owen and 6 other young colonists into open vacuum for sport, a tradition they called asterisk Vethra Star, a rite, recreational hunting of what they considered lesser species. The colonial authority had filed it under piracy incidents. Grant looked at the transit corridor label for 3 seconds. Then he went back to counting rotation patterns. The blind spot was a 6-foot gap in the surveillance grid between 2 Condor housings on the north wall. Kara had mapped it before insertion with the kind of precision that came from cracking the Veth command cipher over 6 months of work. He had memorized the coordinates the same way he memorized everything. Clean rows, no noise. He got 30 seconds on a compressed signal every 4 hours. He did not waste them. Elise picked up on the second ping. Her voice came through flat and quiet. She was running on bad sleep and too much focus. He could always tell. Package is in position, she said. Errand's set. Kara is, a pause, she's working through it. Copy, Grant said. Extraction window opens in 18 hours. You on track? Yes. A longer pause this time. You sleeping at all? Elise asked. When this is done, Grant said. She didn't answer. They both knew what the answer was and they did not say it out loud. That was how they had always worked. 6 years of not saying things out loud. Copy, she said. Gone. Grant stood in the blind spot for another 30 seconds after the signal cut. The war room hummed around him. On the main floor, a Veth officer made a sound that the translator implant couldn't cleanly convert, flat and short, like something between a dismissal and a laugh. Another officer responded. Neither of them looked toward the north wall. Grant picked up his maintenance cart and moved back into the corridor. The Veth did not keep a night shift. Their activity cycle just dipped. Fewer officers on the main floor, slower movement through the corridors, the holographic maps running on their own without anyone watching closely. It was not sleep. It was something else. A lowering of attention that looked, from the outside, a lot like confidence. Grant used those hours to move. He was not built for this kind of work. He knew that clearly. He was built for desks, terminals, conference calls about weight limits and routing errors. His hands were the hands of someone who typed. His knees had been filing complaints about the concrete floors since R3. His lower back had stopped being polite about it around R7. He moved anyway. He worked through 2 secondary corridors, a maintenance access shaft, and a data relay room before he saw it properly. The thing he had been building a picture of in the back of his mind since he walked in. The war room was not just a command center. Every order sent to the Veth Eastern Fleet passed through this room first. every engagement packet, every resource move, every course correction for every ship in their regional campaign. It all routed here and went out from here. Whoever controlled what this room said, controlled what the fleet believed. Grant stood in a maintenance alcove and looked at the relay architecture on a low-security terminal for a long time. He did the math. It sat in the middle of his chest like a swallowed stone. He had come in here for a specific thing. A contained operation. Pull the files, get the proof, get out. That had always been the plan. The plan that Kara had signed on for. The plan that Elise had built the extraction window around. The math was offering him something that was not the plan. 40 million people were currently inside a Veth containment operation. 40 million was a number Grant understood the weight of in a way most people did not, because he had spent 20 years working with numbers like that. He knew exactly what they meant when you broke them into smaller units. He ran the math again from the beginning. It came out the same. Near the end of the low-activity window, Grant sat down in the corner behind a secondary Condor housing and allowed himself 4 minutes. He took the photograph out of his jacket. He did not look at it. He just held it in his hand in the dark, the paper worn soft along the fold lines. The war room hummed. A Veth technician walked past the corridor entrance 30 feet away, footsteps slow and even, not looking at anything in particular. Grant sat there with the photograph in his hand. 4 minutes. Then he put it away. Stood up. Checked the cart. He had identified the relay architecture. He had the rotation patterns. He had a plan that had quietly become a different plan without asking his permission, and he was already past the part where he argued with it. He pushed the cart back into the corridor. The uniform itched at his collar. He did not reach up to fix it. He started counting again. ATR 14. The commander came through. Grant had been watching Shurithfel from a distance since the first hour. He had learned the man's rhythm the way he learned everything, by watching it repeat until the pattern was solid enough to trust. Shurithfel moved through the war room twice per cycle. Once at the start, once midway through. He stopped at specific stations in a specific order. He held a small tablet in his secondary hand at all times. He spoke to his aide without looking at him, a habit of someone who had never needed to check whether an aide was keeping up. He was tall, even by Veth standards. Grey-skinned, with the slow and certain posture of a commander who had run so many operations that war had stopped feeling like an event and started feeling like weather. Just something that happened. Something you managed. Grant hated him with no heat in it at all. During the inspection pass, Shurithfel came through the peripheral corridor where Grant was moving his maintenance cart. Grant kept his head angled down and to the left, the posture Kara had drilled into him for weeks, the exact angle Veth subordinates used around senior officers. Not a bow. Something closer to functional disregard. You were not ignoring a superior. You were simply acknowledging that your work was beneath his notice, and therefore so were you. Shurithfel stopped 4 feet away. Not because anything was wrong. Grant understood that in the first half-second. The commander stopped the way men stop when they are bored and the next task is still 40 seconds away. He said something to his aide. The translator in plant caught it as, *, the maintenance rotation is running slow. *, the aide made a note. Shurithfel moved on. Grant kept pushing the cart. Later, in the blind spot, he replayed those 8 seconds with the same attention he gave to relay architecture and rotation patterns. The tablet in Shurithfel's secondary hand. The way his aide always positioned himself 2 steps back and to the left. The small authentication reader on the tablet side panel. Biometric, thumb-activated, not network-dependent. The tablet did not leave Shurithfel's hand. Grant added it to the list of things he needed and kept moving. The historical archive terminal was low security. Used for old engagement logs and administrative records, not flagged for biometric monitoring. No one cared who looked at old records because old records were not a threat to anyone. Grant found it in a secondary data room off the 3rd maintenance corridor. He had 40 minutes before the next rotation check. He pulled the *Vethra* files. He had expected documentation. Dates. Coordinates. Operational tags the way the Veth filed all their records, clean and administrative, the language of a species that did not consider what it was doing worth giving much language to. He found all of that. He also found names. 43 of them. Human names, ages, origin colonies, transit dates. Filed and closed over 11 years. The colonial authority had known. The intake timestamps on the piracy reclassifications matched too cleanly to be coincidence. Someone on the human side had received these incidents, looked at them, and chosen a word that was not the right word. Grant read every name. He worked through them the way he worked through cargo manifests, steadily, without skipping, giving each one its full second of attention. Because a name without attention was just a mark on a screen, and these were not marks. He got to the 31st name. Prue Okafor, 14 years old. Callisto Settlements. Traveling with a school group. Separated at a transit checkpoint. 14. Grant closed the terminal. He stood in the data room for a moment with his hand still on the terminal edge. Then he picked up the maintenance cart and walked back into the corridor. He did not slow down. He did not speed up. He moved at the same pace he had been moving for 14 hours. He committed all 43 names to memory on the way back. The next signal window came 4 hours later. Kara used it badly, which meant she used it honestly. "I've been thinking about what the plan actually is," she said. Her voice had the careful flatness of someone who had been rehearsing the conversation and was now finding the rehearsal insufficient. Grant waited. "I cracked the cipher so you could get in," she said. "I built the identity scaffold. I did all of it because I thought we were extracting intelligence. Documentation. Proof that the colonial authority couldn't file away again." A pause. "That's what I agreed to." "That's still the primary objective," Grant said. "And after the primary objective." 30 seconds was not a lot of time for this conversation. Grant understood that she was not asking him to explain himself. She was a scientist. She had already worked out the explanation on her own and was now trying to decide what to do with it. "I found the relay architecture," Grant said. "The war room routes every order going to the Eastern Fleet. If I build a false engagement picture inside their system, signed with Shorithvel's authentication codes, the fleet repositions for an attack that isn't coming. The containment operation on the 4 colonial systems loses 2/3 of its supply convoy. 40 million people get a window." Silence. "How long a window?" Kara asked. 48 hours. Maybe more. More silence. The channel had maybe 8 seconds left. "The proof goes out first," Kara said. It was not a question. "The proof goes out first," Grant said. "Everything I've pulled. All 43 names. That's non-negotiable." The channel closed. Grant stood in the blind spot and thought about what her silence had meant in those last 8 seconds. Not refusal. Not agreement. Something in between that was specific to people who understood exactly why a thing was being done and had not yet decided if understanding was the same as endorsing it. He thought she would land where most honest people landed, eventually. He went back to work. Grant moved through the war room's low-activity window with the maintenance cart and did not look at Shorithvel again until near the end of the cycle, when the commander was back on the main floor reviewing fleet positioning maps with his aide. Shorithvel pointed at something on the nearest holographic display. His aide adjusted a setting. The map shifted, a small correction to an engagement vector near the 2nd colonial system. 20,000 lives adjusted by 2 inches of light on a screen. The tablet was in his secondary hand. Grant watched the way Shorithvel held it. The grip. The angle. The moments when the secondary hand relaxed slightly during conversations and the tablet shifted position. He gave himself 6 seconds to watch it. Then he looked back at the floor in front of his cart and kept moving. 43 names sat in a clean row in his head. The math sat next to them. He had not come in here to do what he was now going to do. He knew that. He also knew that the distance between what he came in for and what the room had handed him was not as large as it looked from the outside. The proof and the false orders were 2 ends of the same thing. One told the truth about what the Veth had done. The other made them pay for a small fraction of it in the only currency they understood. 48 hours. 4 colonial systems. 40 million people given a window. And 43 names going out into every channel they had, signed and documented, impossible to refile under the wrong word. Grant pushed the cart toward the next corridor. He had work to do. Grant worked. That was the whole of it. There was no other word that covered what the next 8 hours looked like from the outside. He moved through the war room with his cart, stopped at maintenance panels, ran diagnostic checks that did not need running, cleared Condor housings that were not dirty. He looked, at every moment, like the least interesting thing in the room. He was building a false reality inside the most strategically important communications hub in Veth-controlled space. It was not a bomb. It was not a weapon in any shape that the Veth had a category for. It was something they had never thought to prepare against, because it was built from a specific kind of knowledge that took 20 years of logistics work to grow. Grant understood, better than most, that large systems did not fail because something inside them broke. They failed because they stopped being able to trust their own information. You did not have to destroy the machine. You just had to make the machine wrong about what it was doing. The Veth had been winning wars for 600 years. They had excellent weapons. They had a fleet that outgunned every human ship in the region 4-1. What they had never needed to develop was a defense against someone who could make their own orders into lies. Kara had cracked the cipher. She had done it sitting alone in a protective custody room on a colonial station, working from a data sample the size of a thumbnail, and she had done it in 6 months because she was the best xenolinguist alive and also because she was furious about the *Vethra* files, and fury is an extraordinary fuel source. The cipher gave Grant a key. The key opened the authentication system. The authentication system was the only thing standing between Grant and the ability to write orders in Shorothel's name. He needed the commander's biometric codes to complete it. He had a plan for the codes. He was not thinking about the plan right now. He was building the false engagement picture layer by layer, touching each secondary terminal in sequence, each one a small addition to the architecture. The first false order was already drafted in his head, a flagged human counterattack vector requiring immediate repositioning of the 3rd Eastern Fleet. The second was the supply chain diversion, pulling resupply convoys 3 systems away from the colonial containment operation. He ran the numbers on both while he cleared a conduit housing that was not dirty. They held. The signal came from Elise at hour 20. She burned a full 60 seconds, which meant something was wrong. Aaron hit a problem, she said. The station's jamming grid has a different sweep pattern than we had data on. The broadcast window just got cut from 40 minutes to 14. 14 minutes. Grant ran the math without saying anything. We can strip the data package, Elise said. Cut the command structure files, keep the *Vethra* records full, compress the fleet positioning maps. Aaron thinks we can push the essential package in 12 minutes with 2 to spare. The 43 names go out complete, Grant said. Everything attached to them. That doesn't get compressed. Agreed. That's what I told him. The rest, make the cuts. Already on it. A pause. Her voice shifted down slightly, the way it did when she was being careful. Grant, 14 minutes is tight on Aaron's end. If the sweep pattern shifts again, then we work with what we have. Copy, Elise said. Gone. Grant stood in the blind spot for a moment. He thought about Kara's face, not that he had seen it in weeks, but he knew her face well enough to know what it looked like right now. Pulled tight at the corners. Eyes moving too fast. The look of a person who had handed something dangerous to someone else and was now watching from a distance she could not close. He picked up the cart. He moved. At hour 22, Grant was in a maintenance alcove running a final check on the false orders architecture when a Veth technician sat down on the other side of the conduit wall. 7 feet away. Maybe less. The technician made a personal communication call. Grant's translator implant caught most of it. The Veth language did not translate cleanly at the edges, but the center of it came through. The technician was talking to someone young. Something in the pitch and rhythm of the responses on the other end. Impatient the way young things are impatient, quick and a little careless with words, said Juvenile. A child, or close to it. The technician was patient back. Steady and warm in the specific way of someone who had practice at it. There was a question from the young voice that the implant rendered as something close to asterisk. When are you coming back asterisk? And the technician's answer came through as asterisk, not long now. Asterisk. Then the technician laughed. It was a short sound. Low and genuine. The kind of laugh that doesn't know it's being observed because there's no reason to think it is. Grant sat very still on his side of the conduit wall. He did not move for the 3 minutes the call lasted. The technician said goodbye. The implant lost most of the phrasing, but the shape of it was unmistakable, and ended the call. Footsteps. Moving away down the corridor. Gone. Grant sat there for 1 more minute. Then he went back to the check. He did not examine what those 3 minutes had cost him. There was no time for that, and there was also, if he was being exact about it, no version of examining it that ended somewhere useful. What it was what it was. A parent talking to a child. A laugh in the dark. The ordinary, Specific sound of someone who had something to come back to. He finished the check. The architecture held. He found 2 minor weak points and patched them both. The false engagement picture was clean and complete and sat inside the Veth communication system like a stone at the bottom of still water, invisible, waiting. He looked at his watch. 11 hours to the extraction window. At the edge of the low-activity window, Grant let himself stop in the maintenance alcove and take stock. He had the full *Vethra* documentation, 43 names, dates, coordinates, Shorthvel's administrative signatures on the *Vethra* zone designation. He had the false order's architecture built and dormant. He had 14 minutes of broadcast window instead of 40 and Aaron running a stripped data package that held the things that mattered. What he did not have yet was Shorthvel's biometric codes. He had a plan. It required 1 maintenance pass within 4 feet of the commander during the next inspection cycle, a forged diagnostic request on a data relay panel 3 meters from Shorthvel's usual stopping point, and about 90 seconds of proximity during which the commander's tablet needed to be within range of a passive reader that Grant had been carrying under the maintenance cart's lower shelf since he walked through the door. 90 seconds. He had spent 11 years building a life after Owen. A gutted, forward-facing version of a life, the kind you build not because you want it but because the alternative is a kind of surrender that Owen would have found embarrassing. Owen had thought surrender was for people who hadn't fully thought through their options yet. Grant had been thinking through his options for 3 years. He stood up, checked the cart, and moved back into the corridor. 11 hours. He started counting rotation patterns again. The inspection cycle ran on time. It always had. In 27 hours inside this war room, Grant had never once seen the rotation run late or the inspection pass skip a beat. That was the thing about the Veth. They were consistent. They had been doing the same things for 600 years and the same things had kept working, so they had no reason to do anything differently. It was also the thing that was going to end them. Grant positioned his maintenance cart at the data relay panel 3 meters from Shorthvel's usual stopping point 18 minutes before the inspection pass. He ran a forged diagnostic on the panel's lower housing. Slow work, the kind that required him to crouch and move methodically, the kind that a superior officer walking past would look at once and not look at again. The passive reader was on the underside of the cart's lower shelf. Small. Flat. The size of 2 fingers pressed together. Kara had built it from components that read as standard calibration equipment on any Veth scan. It needed 90 seconds of proximity to the authentication reader on Shorthvel's tablet. Grant crouched at the panel and waited. The footsteps came at the 17-minute mark. Shorthvel's aide was 2 steps behind and to the left. The commander moved through the peripheral corridor the way he always did, taking in the room without focusing on any part of it, the way a man surveys a room he has already understood. He stopped at his usual spot, 4 meters from Grant. Then 3. He was looking at something on the main floor. His aide said something. The commander responded without turning. His secondary hand, the tablet, was at his side, slightly relaxed. The authentication reader was facing outward, 2.5 meters. Grant ran the diagnostic check. He did not look at Shorthvel. He did not look at the tablet. He kept his eyes on the panel housing and his hands moving at the same careful pace they had been moving for 27 hours. 1 minute passed. Shorthvel said something to his aide and they moved on. Down the corridor. Around the corner. Gone. Grant stayed crouched at the panel for another 40 seconds. Then he checked the reader under the cart. Complete. He had the codes. He activated the false orders architecture at R26.
No announcement.
No signal. No dramatic moment of any visible kind. He was at a secondary terminal in a data relay room and he ran the sequence the same way he had run every other sequence in the past 27 hours, methodically, checking each step before moving to the next, correcting 1 small timing error in the 3rd relay that he caught because he was the kind of person who checked. The first order went to the 3rd Eastern Fleet. A flagged human counterattack vector, coordinates precise and plausible, requiring immediate repositioning. Signed with Shorthvel's authentication codes, formatted to match the commander's known communication style. Kara had given him 6 months of signal intercepts to work from, and he had read every one. The second order went to the supply chain. A resource reallocation pulling the bulk of the containment fleet's resupply convoy to a staging point 3 systems out. A routine administrative redirect. The kind of thing that happened all the time in large operations and nobody questioned because the authentication was clean and the formatting was right. The containment of the 4 colonial systems had just been quietly, bureaucratically dismantled. Grant closed the terminal, walked back into the corridor with the cart. The war room kept running. The holographic maps kept cycling. The Veth officers kept moving through their patterns. None of them knew the information they were working from had changed. That was the point. Elise burned another 60 seconds 2 hours later. Shorethfell is pulling reports, she said. Her voice was careful in the way it got when something was developing faster than the plan allowed for. He's running inquiries across 3 departments. He hasn't flagged anything yet, but the pattern is. How long? Grant said. If he's as good as his record says, 2 hours. Maybe less. I need 90 minutes. I know. A pause. Aaron is at the broadcast position. Sweep pattern held. He's ready when you give the signal. 40 minutes, Grant said. Tell him 40 minutes. Copy. She was gone. Grant stood in the blind spot with 40 minutes and 2 hours pressing against each other in his head. He had been running this kind of calculation for 20 years. Find the variable with the least movement and build everything around it. Aaron's 14-minute window was the fixed point. Everything else could compress. He moved. Aaron's position was 2 decks below the war room, deep in the station's engineering section, behind 3 layers of Veth infrastructure that he had been navigating for 4 days. He was young, 26, 27, Grant was not sure, with the careful hands of someone who had learned to move in small spaces without bumping anything. When Grant found him, he was already set up. The relay node was in position. The data package was loaded. Aaron looked at Grant the way people look at someone who has been doing something they couldn't fully understand from the outside. You all right? Aaron said. Yes, Grant said. You ready? 14 minutes on the window. Sweep comes back around at 15:10. Then we start now. Aaron started the broadcast. Grant stood at the entrance to the engineering alcove and watched the corridor. The data package went out in pieces, compressed, layered, routed through a sequence of dead-drop signal buoys that Elise had seeded through the system over the past 4 months. Each buoy caught a piece and passed it forward. By the time any single piece could be traced, the rest was already gone. 43 names. Dates. Coordinates. Shorethfell's administrative signature on the *Vethra* zone designation. The original incident reports from the Colonial Authority with the reclassification timestamps attached. 11 years of documentation that had been filed under the wrong word. Prue Okafor, 14 years old, Callisto Settlements. Owen Cole, 19 years old, Pacific Colony Transfer Route. All 43. Gone into the network. Into channels that Elise had built to be too many and too spread out to suppress cleanly. Somewhere, on a Colonial Authority server, a receiving protocol that Elise had written 6 months ago was waking up and pulling signal. The names were out. 11 minutes. 12. 13. Aaron looked at his timer. Clean, he said quietly. Good, Grant said. Move. They were in the corridor when the war room's alert tone shifted. Not an alarm, not yet. A lower, denser sound. The kind that meant someone senior had escalated an inquiry to the next level. Grant had been listening for it for the past 90 minutes, and he recognized it the way you recognize a sound you have been bracing for. Shorethfell had found something. Not the false orders. The architecture was solid and the authentication was clean. What the commander had found was a pattern. A texture in the operation that did not quite match. Grant had known this was possible. He had built the false picture to answer the obvious questions first, but Shorethfell had not run 600 years' worth of campaigns by only asking the obvious questions. Double time, Grant said. They moved. Grant passed the war room floor one last time through a corridor window, a long rectangular panel of reinforced material that looked down at the command tier from above. Shorethfell was at the center of it. The boredom was gone from his posture. Something sharper in its place. He was talking to 3 aides at once, pointing at the holographic display, pulling the inquiry wider. He did not look up. Grant kept moving. He thought, * you don't know what you lost yet. * not the building. Not a communications hub. Something smaller and more permanent. The story. The one you have been telling yourselves for 600 years, that you can take whatever you want from us, file it under whatever word is convenient, and we will not find a way inside your room and take the story back. That story was gone. It was in 40 channels and a dead drop network and a Colonial Authority server that was right now pulling a signal it had been built to receive. Grant walked to the docking corridor. He did not look back. The extraction was not clean. The first route ran into a Veth security sweep 2 corridors from the docking bay. Not a targeted search. The sweep was wide, covering 4 sections, the kind of response you run when something in the operation feels wrong but you haven't yet identified the exact shape of the wrongness. Shoreth fell, casting a net. Grant and Aaron pulled back into a maintenance junction without running, without making any change in pace that a distant sensor sweep would register as avoidance. Grant checked the secondary route on the map Kara had built into his translator implant. 1 floor up, 3 corridors east, down through a service shaft that Aaron had pre-checked on day 2. This way, Grant said. They moved. The service shaft was narrow. Grant's shoulders caught the walls on both sides and he moved through it on a 45-degree angle, the maintenance cart left behind. Too wide, too slow, it had done its job. Aaron was ahead of him, moving with the careful precision of someone who had practiced this specific route in his head many times. The shaft opened into a lower service corridor. The security sweep sounds were above them now. 3 corridors. Then 2. Grant's knees were filing their loudest complaint yet. His lower back had stopped being polite about anything around R10 and was now simply broadcasting continuous protest. He moved through it the way he had moved through everything in the past 28 hours. 1 corridor. The docking bay. Elise's cargo hauler was sitting dark at the far end. No running lights, no identification signals, the profile of something that had been parked there long enough to stop looking intentional. She had chosen the berth 3 weeks ago. A forgotten corner of a busy station, the kind of slot that maintenance crews walk past without registering. The hatch was open. They got on. Elise did not hug Grant. She stood in the hauler's narrow main corridor and looked at him for a moment, the way you look at something that made it back from a place you were not certain things made it back from. Her expression did not change much. It rarely did. But there was something in the 2 seconds of looking that said more than the expression. Then she said, "You look terrible." "I'm fine," Grant said. "I know you are," she said. "That's what I mean." She turned and moved to the cockpit. Grant followed and sat in the co-pilot seat while she ran the departure sequence. Slow, unhurried, the kind of departure that didn't draw attention because it looked like it had nowhere in particular to be. The hauler pulled out of the berth, moved through the station's outer traffic lane, through the corridor approach, into open space. Aaron was in the back, silent, running a diagnostic on the relay node. He had the look of someone who had just finished an enormously high-stakes thing and was not yet sure how to hold the fact that it was over. Grant understood that. Elise pushed them to jump speed at the edge of the gravity well. The stars went strange. Then they were moving and the station was behind them and Veth-controlled space was a distance that was growing. "Signal," Grant said. "Received on 6 channels as of 8 minutes ago," Elise said. "The Colonial Authority server is pulling the full package." Kara confirmed the receipt on 4 redundant lines. She paused. "It's out, Grant. All of it." He nodded. She let him have the silence. That was something Elise was good at, knowing when silence was the right thing to offer and not filling it. They moved through dark space toward the jump point. 3 days later, the Colonial Authority issued a formal acknowledgement. Not an apology. Not yet, and possibly not ever. Formal acknowledgements from large bodies rarely became apologies because apologies required admitting that a specific person or group of people had made a specific choice to do a specific wrong thing, and large bodies preferred the language of systemic failure and lessons learned and going forward. Grant had no expectations about that. What the Colonial Authority could not do was refile it. The data package had hit 41 channels. It had landed in the inboxes of 7 independent news organizations, 4 human colony system councils, 2 Earth-based legal advocacy groups, and a signals intelligence archive maintained by a retired Navy commander in the Kepler settlements who had been collecting exactly this kind of documentation for 12 years and had 300,000 subscribers to his public feed. The *Vethra* files were public. They were in too many places to suppress. They had too many names attached, 43 of them, with ages, origin colonies, and a Veth commander's authentication signature confirming a designated hunting zone in a human transit corridor. Prue Okafor was no longer a piracy incident. Owen Cole was no longer a piracy incident. None of them were. The Veth Eastern Fleet spent 46 hours repositioning for a human counterattack that did not exist. The containment operation on the 4 colonial systems ran without its full resupply convoy for 51 hours before Shorethfell identified the source of the false orders and issued corrections. 51 hours was a long window. 40 million people had it. What happened next was above Grant's pay grade. He understood this clearly. He was a logistics analyst. He had found the load-bearing points and pressed on them. The larger structure, the political pressure, the legal proceedings, the diplomatic weight of 43 documented names in a public record, that was someone else's work now. He had done his part. Elise gave him a bunk and a door that closed. He sat on the edge of the bunk for a while without doing anything. The hauler moved through dark space. He could feel the low vibration of it through the floor, a steady, even thing. He took the photograph out of his jacket. Owen was 15 in the picture. Standing knee-deep in a Pacific tide pool somewhere, holding up a sea cucumber with both hands, grinning the way he grinned when something delighted him, fully, without any self-consciousness, the laugh 2 beats longer than expected. He was sunburned across his nose and shoulders. He had spent the whole day in that tide pool and come back with a notebook full of drawings and a running list of species he had identified, which he had read out loud at dinner to anyone who would listen. 19 was still 4 years away. Grant looked at the photograph for a long time. The sea cucumber. The sunburn. The grin. The notebook full of drawings that Grant still had, in a box, in a storage unit on a station he had not been back to in 2 years. He had been afraid, when he put it in storage, that keeping it too close would make it harder to move forward. He had been wrong about that. It turned out that keeping something close had nothing to do with moving forward or not. It was just keeping something close. He thought about the technician on the other side of the conduit wall. The laugh. Low and genuine and not meant to be overheard. He thought about 43 names in 41 channels. He folded the photograph carefully, the same fold lines it had always had, worn soft from the number of times the fold had been made and unmade. Slid it back into his jacket pocket. He lay down on the bunk. The hauler moved through dark space. The vibration was steady and even under him. He could hear Aaron in the forward section, moving around quietly, the careful sounds of a young person who did not want to disturb anyone. Grant stared at the ceiling. He thought about Owen once more. Not the transit corridor. Not the incident report filed under the wrong word. Just Owen at 15 in the tide pool, holding a sea cucumber up like it was a discovery worth making, which he had fully believed it was. He had been right about that. He closed his eyes. The hauler moved. Grant slept.